Hi, I'm Alexandra Wilby, and I'm here today with my friend Charlie Morley to talk all about his brilliant book, Do the Shadow Work. Hi, Charlie.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Charlie, your book is called Do the Shadow Work, so I think the best place to begin is for you to tell us how you define the shadow.
So, the shadow is a term pioneered in the West, at least, by the famous Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. And he used the term the shadow to refer to any parts of the unconscious mind that we've repressed, denied, or disowned. So, he referred to the shadow as like the dark side of the human psyche. But not dark meaning bad or evil or malign, dark meaning yet to be illuminated. So, the shadow is anything within us that we are yet to shine the light of conscious awareness onto. My Buddhist teacher, when I asked him, how do you define the shadow? He said the shadow is anything within us that we don't want to face. Robert Holden, brilliant British psychologist, he described the shadow as anything within us that we're currently unwilling to love. And I really like that. Anything within us that we're currently unwilling to love. So we might think, well, stuff that we're ashamed of, aspects that we've been traumatized by, things that we hide from others. But also there might be stuff within us that we're unwilling to love that's really golden, that's really bright, our hidden talents, elements of our sexuality perhaps, elements of our inner light that we fear if we were to express it too fully, we might be rejected by the tribe. So the shadow is still anything that we repress, deny, disown, but it can have these two sides, dark and golden.
So, what brought you to writing this book? What were your influences? What was the journey you went on? How did it come about?
Yeah, so I guess for me, shadow work comes down to my journey into lucid dreaming. In fact, now I realize that lucid dreaming is a form of shadow work, because if you have a lucid dream where you become conscious of the fact you're dreaming and then can direct the dream at will, you are very likely to encounter shadow material, because in the daytime, we repress, we deny, we disown the parts of ourselves we don't want to look at. When you go to sleep at night, and we see this in our normal, non-lucid dreams, these parts swell up and they reveal themselves through our nightmares, through our anxiety dreams. When you become lucid in your dream, you are going to meet shadow content. So from very early on, I realized I was probably doing shadow work, but not knowing it was shadow work. My Buddhist teacher, Rob Nan, he was a Jungian. So he was really into Carl Jung and this integration of the shadow material practices. And it was through him that he kind of taught me about the shadow. But the journey for the book actually began in a 3-month silent retreat that I did in 2015. So I went to South Africa and I rented this kind of meditation hut. And for 3 months, I was mostly in silence, mostly meditating all day for like 10, 11 hours a day, and mostly alone. I did speak on a couple of days. I spoke on Christmas Day, I spoke on New Year's Day, and I spoke on the day that I was stung by a scorpion. But that's a whole other story. You spent 3 months to be in the active, but yeah, there was my shadow work, right? So on that retreat, and I didn't really know this would happen, but if you spend 3 months alone in silence meditating all day, your shadow is going to be abundantly and very obviously revealed. Because anything you've been trying to run from or hide from or turn to not face is going to come up, right? Because meditation, we turn the mind inwardly rather than being obsessed with these kind of outer imagery of light. We turn inwardly and we start to see what's really there. So I had this big kind of download of shadow material. And by the end of that 3-month retreat, I realized that I had to write about this. I realized that my dreams were being affected by it. I saw a lot of insights into the kind of practices that I wanted to put into a book. So basically that 3-month retreat is where the germ of the idea first came.
Wow. And was it a retreat that you actually go on and other people were doing it as well? Or did you just rented somewhere and went and did it?
Yeah, so this was like a solo retreat. So I wouldn't recommend people jumping straight into this. This was after like 10 or 15 years of Buddhist practice up to this point of doing like group retreats and stuff like this. But there was a certain practice that it's said is best to do alone. So there were other people on the retreat. Like I could see people at my window and stuff, and at mealtime I saw people. I just wasn't able to talk to people. And actually that was really interesting. One of the big shadow pieces that came up when I was on that retreat was something that I labeled or named addiction to adoration.
Ooh.
I found that when I was in silence for so long and not talking to people for so long, this voice of the ego became so loud in me. And I would go and get my meal at lunchtime, and I was desperately trying to make contact with people. I knew I couldn't speak to them, but I wanted them to look at me. I had this thing where my ego was like screaming out for acknowledgement, and not just acknowledgement, adoration. I realized I needed people to see me and to like adore me. I was like, this is fucked. Like, it's this huge kind of demon within me that I didn't know was there. And when I say demon, there's a cool Tibetan definition of what a demon is. Because we use the term, well, I've got these demons within me. The Tibetan definition of a demon is anything that obstructs your experience of freedom. Isn't that cool?
Oh, I love that.
And they kind of say like a demon is not some monstrous figure that terrifies everyone who looks upon it. A demon is anything that prevents your experience of freedom. So I saw I had this demon within me, this demon of the addiction to adoration, the addiction to being acknowledged, to being seen.
Wow.
And going into silence and aloneness for a long time allows those shadow elements to reveal themselves.
That's fascinating. So that was 10 years ago. So why now? Why the book now?
Well, this book is actually kind of sourced from another book. So the book that I wrote 10 years ago is called Dreaming Through Darkness, which was lucid dreaming and shadow work. And then a year or so ago, I realized not only did I want to update the book, but there's loads more stuff I wanted to add to it, and actually a lot of stuff I wanted to remove from it. So Do the Shadow Work is based on that original book, Dreaming Through Darkness, but all of the lucid dreaming stuff has been removed. Lots of new exercises have been added, and it's basically a full rewrite, because I realized there wasn't a book out there that was like a really practical guide to shadow work. There were some very good books that talked about the theory of shadow work, and these amazing, intellectual tomes on what Jung meant by the shadow and all this kind of stuff. And they're great, and it's kind of intellectual fodder to chew on. But there were very few books that said, like, this is actually how you do it. Here's a set of exercises that, if you do them, lead to the integration of the shadow. And that's the kind of gap that I wanted to fill with this book.
Oh, amazing. And you absolutely have. It's amazing. It's completely, step by step. You can pick this up and you can start your shadow work immediately. Lots of people will have followed your work around lucid dreaming and will now be coming to this book. So what is the link between the two of them?
Yeah, so what's the link between lucid dreaming and shadow?
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, more and more I'm feeling today that lucid dreaming is a form of shadow work.
Mm-hmm.
If you go into your dreams, you will meet your shadow. But I kind of wish I'd done it the other way around. I now realize that people who want to get into lucid dreaming, a really good preparation for lucid dreaming is to do shadow work beforehand. Because shadow work, like, it's preparing the ground. It's planting the seeds. It's doing the weeding of the psyche that will make lucid dreaming actually far easier when you go to do it. And one of the big obstacles people get when they start lucid dreaming is that in their lucid dreams, they might meet nightmarish figures. And if you've done the shadow work and you know the content of your shadow, what is it within me that I'm ashamed about? What is it within me that I'm afraid of? What is it within me that I'm repressing, denying, disowning? Then when you're in a lucid dream and some nightmarish figure appears, like some weird sexualized, monster or something like that, you're far more likely to go, oh, okay, that's my shadow. Elements of sexuality, elements of violence, elements of repressed anger. Okay, that's it personified. Whereas somebody who hasn't done the shadow work might often fall into this trap, I think, of believing this is some external thing. People thinking, oh, this couldn't be my mind. It's some external demon that's entered in. It's like, these demons don't exist. It's just mind, right? So I think being aware of your shadow and knowing the content of it is a really good setup to the lucid dreaming practices that follow.
Do you think you have fewer nightmares if you do shadow work?
Do you have fewer nightmares if you do shadow work? No, not necessarily. You might end up having more nightmares. But your view of what a nightmare is and the benefits that a nightmare can offer you will completely flip on the head. We have this idea that nightmares are bad. And we even use the term nightmare as a pejorative term, like, oh, my journey here was a nightmare. Oh, that person at work, they're a bloody nightmare. We have this idea nightmares are bad. Actually, nightmares are really, really good. If you can become lucid in a nightmare, that's a far more beneficial lucid dream than getting lucid in a dream where you're kind of sunbathing in a beach. If you have your dream of sunbathing on the beach and then you become lucid, oh, I'm dreaming, this is cool, I'm sunbathing on the beach. It's a fun dream, but not much psychological integration has occurred.
Right.
If you become lucid in a zombie apocalypse, oh, I'm lucid. Whoa, what do these zombies represent?
Yeah.
Maybe they're parts of me wounded or or deceased parts of me that are now somehow animated and still zombified walking around my psyche. That's a cool lucid dream to have, because if you can then go and embrace those zombies, show love to those zombies, you're showing love to the wounded parts of yourself. So no, in many ways, shadow work might give you more nightmares, but what you view as a nightmare will completely change. You can even get to the stage where you go to sleep, maybe not hoping for nightmares, but knowing that if a nightmare comes, what an opportunity. What an opportunity.
You can harness it.
Yeah.
Harness it.
Nightmares can be so good for growth. And also just generally, even if you don't get lucid in a nightmare is a sign of a healing mind. When we go through traumatic experiences, we're supposed to have nightmares about them. Doesn't mean you have to have nightmares, but if you do, it's a completely natural process. Just like when we cut our arm, a scab is formed. A scab is a protective barrier that allows healing to occur beneath the surface. So too is a nightmare. A nightmare is an expression. It's like an immune response of the mind. Oh, I love that. It's cool, isn't it?
It's really cool. Charlie, you're also known for your work with veterans. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the veterans work and the shadow work is very closely linked, actually. A lot of people who get into lucid dreaming come to it because they're working with nightmares. And a lot of people with nightmares are having nightmares because they've experienced trauma. So it wasn't so surprising after a few years of teaching lucid dreaming, so veterans started to come to my courses. Well, one veteran in particular, Keith McKenzie, and then many others after them. And working with veterans, working with a population that are so highly traumatized, as many British military veterans are, was a really good way to look at not just lucid dreaming, the shadow work more generally. Because some of these people couldn't get to sleep, let alone have dreams and lucid dreams. So when working with the veterans, it really became an expression of shadow integration, because we had to look at what had happened to you. Not this idea of like what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you. Because there's nothing wrong with what's happened. It's an expression of the mind's capacity to cope. And that will express itself through nightmares, through panic attacks, through hypervigilance, whatever it is. This idea of post-traumatic stress disorder is one I'm really not attuned with. I think we should call it post-traumatic stress display, because it's not a disorder. Post-traumatic stress symptoms are a natural display of this immune response of the mind that have been wounded. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad about it. So working with veterans has been a really important part of my work, and also kind of marrying the dream stuff with the shadow work stuff.
And you had amazing results with the veterans as well, haven't you?
Yes. So we did a very interesting lucid dreaming study with veterans, where we had, actually, it wasn't just veterans. It was that many of the people in the study were veterans, but some were other traumatized populations, people who'd suffered childhood sexual abuse, people who've been in car crashes, as well as lots of people who are military veterans. And we had a 1-week study where we taught them lucid dreaming. And at the beginning of the week, we checked their PTSD score, which is, it sounds a bit arbitrary, but it's basically like a medically, it's like a medical diagnosis of how traumatized somebody is based on a point score. And at the beginning of the week, the point score of the trauma level of the group was way above the medical threshold. It was a very traumatized group. Obviously, they all had PTSD. We then had a week with them, teaching them lucid dreaming. Many of them were able to have a lucid dream. Many of them had multiple lucid dreams. And in those lucid dreams, they engaged what we refer to as a healing lucid dream. So in the lucid dream, they turned to face their fear, or they transformed their nightmare, or they were able to move towards the source of their trauma rather than run away from it. Then at the end of the week, we took their trauma score, again, their PTSD score, and the average trauma score was way beneath the medical threshold. So much so that 85% of the 55 participants in the pilot study were actually so far beneath the medical threshold, they were no longer medically diagnosed as having PTSD. So quite crazy results.
Such valuable work.
Yeah, it was a very special study. And then after that, we were able to do a randomized control study with 100 people to see, could we replicate the results of the pilot? And we were able to replicate those results similarly again.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
So what does the shadow look like day to day? How does it manifest in all of us?
I think in very subtle ways. Anytime we're kind of irritated, there's a sign that the shadow's there. It's almost as if like the shadow is like the sand that irritates the clam to make the pearl. It's like, in fact, Carl Jung actually advised people, hang out with people who annoy you if you want to see your shadow. So in very subtle ways, it's this. But I think it's easier to see it when it's really more kind of extreme cases. So I'd say anytime in life we have an over-exaggerated emotional response that far exceeds the input that was given to us, there's probably shadow at play here. So anytime we have an over-exaggerated emotional response. So for example, let's say me and you are walking down the street and someone in front of us drops litter. Now, you might observe the person dropping litter and go, oh, that's not good, they dropped litter. You might even pick it up, put it in the bin. You have been informed by what has happened, but you haven't been like emotionally affected by it. You haven't had an over-exaggerated emotional response. I, on the other hand, see the person drop litter and I completely blow. Can't believe those people can walk the streets. How can they do? I'm start yelling at the guy. I'm really affected by this. That probably means there's some shadow content within me associated with the act of dropping litter. But it's about the energy, not the act. So I might say, but no, really, I never drop litter. So this is bullshit. It can't be as I've got unseen shadow material within me. The energy, not the act. So what is the energy of dropping litter? It might be rules don't apply to me. I'm better than other people. I do what I like. And then I start thinking, okay, maybe that's why I got this trigger here. So anytime we're triggered into over-exaggerated emotional responses towards anything, any personal situation, there's probably shadow material there. And it works on the golden side too. Let's say me and you go to a party and we meet a guy called Tom. And we leave the party and I'm going, oh, wow, you met that guy called Tom. He was so cool. I can't wait to add him on Instagram. I really want to be his rep. I really want to hang out with this guy. And you're like, Tom? Tom who? We both met the same person, but I was triggered into an over-exaggerated emotional response of admiration and awe. That probably means there's some golden shadow material within me, unseen, that this guy Tom represents. So this is really interesting. Look at the people, not only who really trigger you into annoyance, but look at the people who trigger you into admiration and awe. And then ask yourself, what is it within these people that I might have within myself? Both those people who irritate and annoy me, but also those people who really trigger me into admiration and awe. Because often, the shadow by its nature is hidden. So we can't always see it. It's as if we need to use these kind of mirrors to see where could our shadow be. And one of those mirrors to see where you are triggered into over-exaggerated emotional response.
Mm-hmm. So why do we have these shadows? Where do they come from?
It's interesting. In the Jungian psychological theory on this is a bit different to the Buddhist one actually, but in Jung's psychological theory, the shadow is an archetype, right? So an archetype is an internally generated, universally existing matrix of psychological energy. It's like these parts of us which link us to others. So we had archetypes like the king, the lover, the magician, the fool, these parts of us which we find in all other human psyches around the world, right? The mother, the father archetype. Jung said, or Jung believed, that the shadow was the only archetype that doesn't come factory installed. So that as children, all of these archetypes are within the psyche. They're ready to come, their seeds planted, ready to bloom. The shadow, he said, we didn't. He said we create the shadow. And because we create the shadow, because we construct it in childhood, it's also the only archetype that we can fully deconstruct. So it is possible to integrate the shadow to such a degree that we no longer have it. We are shadow free. And to be shadow free would be synonymous with spiritual awakening, right? It would be somebody who is completely immune to over-exaggerated emotional responses, which is why I often say if someone claims to you they fully integrated their shadow, see if you can piss them off. Because if they're irritated or pissed off, they've still got shadow material here, right? So who knows? So apparently we create the shadow in childhood. The Buddhist view is quite different, right? Because this is not our first rodeo. We've got past lives, so we come in here with all this baggage actually from our past lives. But Jung believed that we create the shadow in childhood. And we do. We, as children, we come into life completely dependent on our primary caregivers. So as children, we create like an inventory of love because the love of our caregivers is so crucial to our survival. So from very young children, we start to notice what brings love from our caregivers and what leads to the removal of love or rejection of love. And anything that leads to the rejection or removal of love from our primary caregivers, we push into the shadow of our mind. Again, the shadow is anything we've denied, repressed, disowned. So in childhood, we start to create these building blocks of the shadow. And of course, the shadow will be completely culturally dependent. You know, the shadow created in a child of liberal, left-leaning parents will be very different to the shadow created by a child who has very conservative parents, for example. But we create these building blocks of the shadow in childhood. And then anytime we shame ourselves, we shame, fear, and trauma are these building blocks of the shadow. So anytime we feel ashamed, anytime we are afraid to face things in life, and anytime we push away parts of ourselves that have been traumatized, we create shadow material. So the seeds are planted in childhood, but a lot of what we do to create the shadow happens in adulthood.
So what would be an example of that for a small child? Let's say, I don't know, they're 2 or something. Is it if they haven't put their toys away and they get shouted at? What are some tangible examples of how we're building this shadow?
Yeah, so let's say we've got a little child who is happily running around their house naked, right? Completely fine with a naked body. But then one day they run out of the front door or into the back garden or out the end of the back garden naked. And suddenly their parents are chasing after them and yelling at them. Now, the child's pre-verbal. They can't understand what the parent's saying. So, it's something negative. It's something about my naked body in public is bad. And the child doesn't have the discernment to know, oh, it's not actually my naked body that's bad. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the fact that I've gone out in public like that. So the child will say there's something wrong with my naked body, with my naked form, and will push that into the shadow of the unacceptable. And it's moments like that that we start to create the shadow. And this is why I think a lot of people have shadow material around body shame. Or perhaps a child is playing with their older brother or sister and, they want to keep the Lego, they're not sharing, and they snatch the Lego back. And again, the parents, something negative. They get this idea that setting boundaries or being affirmative or letting people know what I need or what I want is bad. So I mustn't do that. I mustn't snatch. So suddenly the child puts that sense of affirmative action into their shadow. So I think it begins in this kind of confusion in the child between what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Okay. Now, if we are parents or caregivers and you're a new dad, how can we avoid putting things into the shadow that don't need to be there? Because I'm always asking myself.
Yeah, tell me about it. It's like, I think that the best gift we can give to our children is integrating our own shadow. We are inevitably going to add to the shadow of our children, like inevitably. And I think we're going to tie ourselves in knots if we're constantly thinking, how am I not going to create shadow material with our child? I mean, obviously, we want to try not to traumatize our child, right? Obviously. But the best gift we can give to our children is to integrate our own shadow. Because if we can be less ruled by fear and shame and trauma, we are less likely to project that unintegrated shadow side onto our children. And they can pick up on that. I don't think we can wrap our children in cotton wool. They're going to be exposed to this. And in fact, the creation of the shadow side and the creation of the ego is part of their sense of self. It's not that we want to stop it happening, but it's that we want to at least limit the damage that we can do.
Mm-hmm. This leads us nicely onto the bag that we drag behind us. Yeah, can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so there's an exercise in the book called the bag that we drag behind us, which is a quote actually from this guy called Robert Bly, who was a famous American poet and Jungian. And he described the shadow as this bag that we drag behind us. He says, we come into this world baggage free. He's riffing on kind of emotional baggage. But he says, by the time we finish school, we've got this bag that's meters long. And we stuff into the bag anything we want to hide from others. So this is mainly based on the opinions of our primary caregivers. And then we go into school and it's based on the opinions of the cool kids and our peers and our teachers and anyone who holds power over us. Anything we hide from others, we stuff into this bag and we create this emotional baggage. And one of the exercises in the book is that I get people to draw on a piece of paper a bag. They draw themselves as a little kid, then they draw this bag and they write, symbolize or draw anything into the bag that they had to push in there as a child. So I was looking at kind of the emotional baggage we created in childhood, as children. And then you look as adults. What, as adults, is this emotional baggage that we're pushing into the bag? It might be heartbreak, it might be grief, it might be anything that's weighing us down. And there's something about seeing on the page in this like artistic representation of what's in our shadow that can be really powerful for people to see. And often at the end of the exercise, they're like, well, what do I do now? How do I get rid of this stuff? The point isn't to get rid of it. The point is to know that it's there, because awareness in and of itself is curative. So simply to be aware of our shadow material is already to start the process of transformation. You know, awareness is like the sun. It transforms that which it shines upon. So it's not about getting rid of the shadow. It's about knowing what's there. And then once we know what's there, transformation can begin to take place.
Okay, so shame, fear, and trauma are the building blocks of the shadow, you say. How does this get reinforced then in adulthood when we've got this bad and we just keep putting more things in it?
Yeah. I think the first thing, I think shame is a really important one to look at. You know, Brené Brown, the famous researcher, kind of shame researcher, in this great TED talk on this, she's got this quote that shame gains its power from being unspeakable. Shame gains its power from being unspeakable. So there's a lot we can do with shame, where when we first to see it, to acknowledge it, and then to speak it out loud is a really great way of integrating our shame shadow. In the same way as, like, you know, in Harry Potter, like, no one will say Voldemort's name. Yeah, he's the one who should not be named. The only one with the courage to call him by his name is Harry Potter. So there's something about naming and speaking out loud that which we are afraid of, that which we were ashamed of, that really helps with the integration process. Because again, shame gains its power from being unspeakable. So a lot of the exercises we do in the book are about looking at the things that we're ashamed of within ourselves, our most shameful moments, our most shameful traits. And then firstly, writing them down so we acknowledge them. And then also at some stage being willing to share them with another. And it could be literally with your own face in the mirror. That can be the first step, is to look at yourself in the mirror and to speak out these aspects of your shame. And then when you're ready, to find someone you trust, to speak it out to them. And then if you're even more ready than that, there's something we do where on my Facebook page, there's a gallery of these masks. And we can look at the mask exercise in a minute, which is where we write down everything we're afraid of, we're ashamed of, all these parts of our shadow onto a mask. And there's actually a gallery where you can anonymously upload a picture of your mask. And there's hundreds on there now, as a way of really expressing to the world that you're ready to let go of the shame, that you're ready to release it.
Powerful, really powerful. Okay, so the $1 million question, how do you do the shadow work?
Yeah, how do you do the shadow work? There are a series of meditations, exercises, visualizations, self-inquiry practices, shamanic exercises, Buddhist meditations that help you directly integrate the shadow. And this is what we want to do, not to get rid of the shadow, but to integrate. And this term integrate, from the Latin word integrare, means to bring together, to make whole again, to make one, that which is separated. The book is full of those exercises.
Yes.
So if you want like a theoretical understanding of the shadow and the kind of Jungian academic view on it, probably try another book. If you want a series of exercises that if you do them, they will lead to the integration of your shadow, then everything is there in the book.
So what is the process that you walk readers through in this book?
Yeah, so literally, how do we do it, right?
Yeah.
The first thing we do is to look at a set of questions. So this is a self-inquiry practice, would be the kind of psychological term of it. So we look at questions that will help us come into an awareness of our dark shadow and help us come into an awareness of our golden shadow. So the questions for the dark shadow are things like, what am I most afraid of? What am I most ashamed of? What parts of myself do I hide from others? Once you start looking at those questions, you start to gain some insight into what's the current content of my shadow side. Then we do the same with a set of golden shadow questions. So things like, where in my life do I hide my light? When do I feel most alive? If I didn't need to work for money, how would I spend my life? Who do I most admire and why? These questions that help you gain some insight into elements of your golden shadow. Because we have the shadow being anything that we repress, deny, disown, which has these two aspects, our golden shadow, which is really constructive parts of our shadow, and then the dark shadow, which has the potential to be more destructive. One of the golden shadow questions actually that I often ask people at workshops is, who here hides their esoteric side, their spiritual side, for fear of being labeled too woo-woo? And you get like everyone in the room that's there. That's golden shadow. So it's a part of you that is absolutely golden, that is so positive, that is so good for you and others, yet you hide it, you repress it, you disown it, you deny it. Why? Same reason you hide your dark shadow. Fear of rejection of the tribe, fear of being labeled too woo-woo, fear of people thinking you're weird and not liking you. It's still stuff that we hide, but it's very golden. It's very good for us. In fact, I did a shadow workshop last year for teenagers. I'd never done that before. And some of them were like young teenagers, 13, 14.
Oh, wow.
And we were looking at this golden shadow, and I was trying to explain to them the concept of the golden shadow. And this one girl went, oh, I think I know what my golden shadow is. Or a part of my golden shadow. And I said, yeah, what is it? She goes, I love bugs. And I was like, what? She said, bugs. I love bugs. I like collecting bugs. I like helping bugs. If I see a bug that's dead, I try and bring it back to life. I love bugs. I keep them in jars. But I don't tell anyone about it. And I was like, why? And they'll think I'm weird. I can see them now. They think I'm weird. And I was like, that's a perfect example of golden shadow.
Yeah.
This secret passion that she has, this secret thing that she really loves, but she's ashamed to show people it. She's ashamed to talk to people about it because they might reject her. That's golden shadow. So we have this first exercise looking at the questions. Then we do an art therapy exercise, which is the bag that we drag behind us that I mentioned before. We draw onto the page a bag containing our psychological baggage. So again, we get to see it on the page. After people have done the bag that we drag behind you exercise, where they create the bag and they write into all of their emotional baggage, there's another part of the exercise where I ask them to attach to the bag a series of helium balloons. And in each of those helium balloons, they write any person, thing, activity, belief system, even addiction that helps lighten the load of their psychological, emotional baggage. And in that, you get people writing, their partners, their spiritual practice, psychedelics, for example, neurodiversity. Like in my bag, I write dyslexia because dyslexia often weighs me down. I often feel stupid when I have what I call a dyslexia moment. But also about once a month, I have a dyslexia superpower moment. Yeah. When I realize I'm thinking in a different way from anybody else. And it's a really unique way of approaching the situation. So in my bag, I have dyslexia, and my balloon, I have dyslexia. Again, some people write in their addictions, which is very interesting. They acknowledge that it's not that their addiction is good, but yes, their addiction to whatever it is, drugs or food or sex, does help lighten the load of their emotional baggage. So again, it's a more subtle exercise than it might seem. It's not kind of bad, good. It's about emotional baggage and what helps lighten the load of our emotional baggage. And again, by doing this, you've got this visual image, this visual representation of our emotional baggage and the coping mechanisms that we use to help lighten the load of that emotional baggage. And again, this gives us insight into the shadow. The shadow by its nature is hidden. So we have to use ways to circumvent the awareness process. Because if you just try and go what's in my shadow? It's going to be really difficult to see because the shadow by its nature is hidden. It's in the dark. But you can circumvent the awareness process by using insight training, by using creativity and art therapy, by using masks, by using mirrors, by using meditation, visualization practices that help you shine light into those dark areas that just looking won't do. Then we do an exercise looking at projection. So we look at who triggers you, people who irritate you, people who trigger you into annoyance, into anger, then also people who trigger you into admiration and awe, because that's how you see the golden shadow. Who triggers you, but triggers you positively, makes you really kind of crush on them. Oh, they're so cool. I really love that person. What celebrities do you wish were your best friends? If you look at that and then you see what are the qualities of that celebrity, you will almost certainly have some of those qualities within yourself. Because if you did not, you would simply not have been triggered by them in the first place. So if you meet somebody, anybody, celebrity or not, who triggers you into a feeling of admiration or awe, undoubtedly the qualities that they have, you have too. Otherwise, you simply wouldn't be triggered by them. In the same way as when you meet someone who really irritates you, who really pisses you off, unfortunately, undoubtedly, you will have some of those traits within you. Otherwise, they simply wouldn't piss you off to that same inflated degree as they do. So we look at projection, we look at the bag that we drag behind us, we look at these set of questions. This kind of forms the first layer of meeting the shadow. Then we move on to befriending the shadow. We do the mask exercise.
Yes.
Which we will talk about in depth.
Yes.
We create these masks. In fact, let's talk about masks.
Let's talk about it now. Tell us about the mask.
Okay.
That's a very confronting part of your book, actually, and very vulnerable of you to share this story.
Yeah. So this is the mask. And
So why did you make this mask? When and what is it?
Okay, so this mask I bought from Amazon a couple of months after I came back from that 3-month meditation retreat, where a lot of the original shadow book ideas were planted. I realized on that retreat that there was a lot of me that I was hiding from people. You know, at this point, I was living in a Buddhist temple. I was running workshops alongside my Buddhist teacher, who's this quite well-known meditation teacher and stuff like that. And there was a lot of me that I was really ashamed of, that I was hiding, even though my dress was different. If you look on my YouTube videos in the early days, I looked like a geography teacher. And I realized there was loads of stuff I was hiding. So when I came back from the retreat, I knew I wanted to create an exercise around masks. So I went on to Hamilton and I ordered this mask. I now give people these kind of paper ones because you can burn them. But this is the original mask I ordered. And I got this mask. And on the outside of the mask, I wrote everything that represented my persona at the time. So your persona is like the way you present yourself to the world. Could be completely true, could be completely false, could be a little bit of both. Most people, their persona is a little bit of both. So on the persona side of the mask, I wrote things like smiley, good Buddhist, lovable, trustworthy, lucid dreamer, cool guy, brave, knowledgeable, joyous, happy, kind, sorted, attractive, empath, you know, all these things. Now, are they true? Some of those are true sometimes. Are they true always? No. You spend more than a week with me, you'll know I'm not always like that. More than a day with me, probably, right? So that's the persona. That's the way I want you to see me 10 years ago. Anyway, probably much the same now, actually, when I read through it. Then on the inside of the mask, I wrote everything that I was hiding, everything that I really hoped no one would ever find out about me. So I wrote things like judgmental, body image issues, fear, shame, porn watcher. That was a big one to write. Fucked upness, anger, arrogance, part-time lucid dreamer, bully, sex addict, ? Hatred, violent fantasies, need to be validated, part-time lucid dreamer, sexual trauma, arrogance, perversion, imposter syndrome, you know, all this stuff that I really hoped no one would ever find out about me. And as I wrote it down into this mask, rather than feeling like triggered and traumatized, I started to feel this big release. There was something about like almost downloading it, as if the shame was like stored in my body. And by writing it down here, I downloaded it from the body into the mask. And then I looked at it and I was like, you know what? It's okay. This is me. Like, it's okay. And I start to feel this real release and sense of authenticity. And then this thing where I thought, well, maybe if I actually turned up and allowed people to see this part of me, rather than trying to present myself as this like perfect, like lucid dreaming teacher living in a Buddhist center and all this kind of stuff, maybe that would actually be really helpful for people. So I finished this mask and then I'm sitting on my bed in the Buddhist center at the time when I did this. And I put the mask like that down in the bed next to me. And then I got worried that my fiance at the time would walk in. So I was like that. And it was the act of doing that, the act of turning it over that was the trigger point for me. Because I was like, what a hypocrite. You've just done this 3-month retreat. You're supposed to be all meditated up. You're supposed to be trying to be more authentic. And you can't even show your fiance. No way. So I flipped it back like that. And that's when the idea came to me. I was like, I should share this on Facebook. It's before Instagram, but I was like, I'll share this on Facebook and Twitter. Yeah, certain how long ago it was. So I take a photo of it, like front part, back part, and then I upload it to, I don't know how many followers, 20,000 followers or something on Facebook and Twitter and all this kind of stuff. And I felt really good for like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And then after about 2 seconds, this panic hit. And I thought, oh shit, what have I done? The 3 big fears that I had, this is interesting. The first one was that I would get dropped by my publisher, Hay House, for all these books.
Well, that didn't happen.
Yeah, luckily, because Hay House are all kind of love and delight and stuff like that. And I thought, God, they see this. There's no way they're going to keep publishing my work. The second thing I said was I thought I'd be chucked out of the Buddhist center because like the Lama would be like, whose internet are you looking at porn or something like that? What room are you watching? This kind of thing. Yeah. And then the third thing, this is probably the worst one, was I thought, how could my fiance bear to marry that? Right. That was a big one. I was like, how could she bear to marry that? Wow. And I went from this big kind of jump from feeling so authentic and so relieved to suddenly like, oh, what have I done? the shadow really came back in this fear, shame, and trauma. And so I started to look for a way to get rid of the post that I just made. So I'm trying to delete it off Twitter and Facebook. And then suddenly my phone starts beeping, bing, bing, bing. And I'm, oh God, there's going to be people telling me like, dude, what have you done?
Yeah.
At that time, like Elon Musk smoked a joint on a Joe Rogan podcast and his phone starts going off. Where everyone's saying, what are you doing? And I thought, oh, it's going to be like that. And then I looked at the phone and it was likes coming in and then comments, really positive comments. And I just thought, okay, I'll leave it up for 5 more minutes, just see what the vibe is. And these comments kept on coming through really positive. And by the end of the day, it was my most liked, most commented on, most positively shared Facebook post ever. Actually, by the end of the day, some people had gone to a toy shop to buy masks to do their own version of the exercise. And I know, okay, this is a big one. Yeah. Oh, and then also at the end of the day, my fiance did come into the room and I was really brave now. And I said, I want to give you this mask. I handed her the mask and she looked at it there. And then she just went, what about the rest? She was like, of course I know all this stuff about you. You think I didn't?
Yeah.
And that was really interesting too, that we have this idea that our shadow is so hidden that our loved ones have no idea of it. Actually, they do. Because what we fall in love with are people's vulnerabilities.
Yes.
We don't fall in love with their persona. We like their persona. A lot of our friends, we might just know their persona because that helps kind of upkeep our view of who we think we are. But those we really love, not just acquaintances or friends, but real good friends, real people we love, they know our shadow.
Yeah.
Because that's what we love about people. We love their vulnerability. We actually love their wounds. We love the fact that they had been through these traumas and tribulations. So yeah, I think actually those we love often know our shadow far better than we do.
And I think this is part of why this book is so powerful, because you are very vulnerable in it. So it's not like it's a preachy book. You have done this and you are sharing the ways in which you did it and what your shadow is, which I think is really helpful for the reader.
I hope so. Yeah, I think it's really important if you're going to ask you to do these exercises in the book, that not only the reader knows you've done them several times, but you're willing to share them.
Yeah.
You're willing to share your deepest shadow, because then you're creating this environment that it's okay to talk about this stuff. Especially at workshops when I share the kind of porn watcher thing, that often leads to a really good conversation about like porn addiction in men. And actually a lot of women now at recent workshops have talked about this too. The internet generation, being addicted to dopamine off our phones and stuff like that. And what I found was that when people do this exercise and they write what's in their mask, everything they're hiding, it's not that this becomes amplified. It actually starts to release. People are less likely to engage in the things they write in their mask once they've done the exercise than before, because shame gains its power from being unspeakable. And we enter into the shame loop when we're so ashamed of the things we do that we don't tell anyone about them. And then that creates this loop that we keep doing them. So there's something very liberating about doing this exercise at the mask.
And what was the effect on you after you saw the reaction to the mask and from your ex-fiancé? How did it affect you going forwards?
So talking about what I used to wear in my YouTube videos, that's one of the first things you see, actually. I start dressing how I normally dress.
Wow.
In like bright t-shirts, and I maybe start swearing in videos where I used to never swear. And maybe even my voice has changed. I'm speaking my normal voice, not my teaching voice, where I would speak like this and try and be a very good Buddhist. You can just see these subtle changes. But also it changes the way I show up. Like if you show up at a workshop, and like most people at the workshop would probably read the book or seen one of these videos or something, you'll walk into a room where everybody knows your shadow side.
Yes.
And it's so relaxing.
Right.
You're walking this room knowing that like this group of strangers actually know you better than some of your closest acquaintances. So it really changes the vibe. And when we do this on retreats, let's say you've got 40 or 50 people on a retreat and you've got everyone in the room doing this mask exercise, then at the end they swap their mask, they show it to other people and they read them. For the rest of the retreat, the vibe is completely changed, because now you've got 40 or 50 people who are no longer strangers. They have really bonded over this shared experience of how do they present themselves and what do they hide.
Yeah.
And you get really interesting things come up. Like one of the most interesting things for me was a lady was doing this exercise at one of the retreats. And on the front of the mask, she had written bitch, exclamation mark. Really interesting. And then, so the outside of the mask had like bitch, a hard, cold, all these kind of things. Like, that's really interesting. Then the inside of her mask were things like cold, unapproachable, all these kind of things. I thought that's really interesting. I looked on the inside of her mask and it had things like emotional, soft, girly, scared, these kind of things. And I spoke to her afterwards, and she was in financial industry. She worked in Canary Wharf, and she said, I have to present myself as a bitch because otherwise they would walk all over me, the they being the men and the patriarchy and all this. And what she hid were her really vulnerable golden parts, but what she presented with this really kind of hard-nosed businesswoman. So it's really interesting doing this exercise. It's not about good, bad. It's about how we present and what we hide. And that's very interesting. So much of why people go into therapy is to see what are we hiding from? What are these wounded parts of ourselves? And this exercise is a really good way to get some semblance of what we're hiding. After the mask exercise, we move into a real golden shadow exercise, which is called no mud, no lotus.
Oh, yeah.
Where we're using this Buddhist idea of the no mud, no lotus approach is the opposite of spiritual bypassing. It's not saying, oh, there's been loads of bad things in my life and that's okay, just think positive. It's saying there have been loads of bad things in my life, times where I have really suffered. But in retrospect, I can see that not in all cases, but in some of those cases, that period of suffering led to an explosion of psychological or spiritual growth. Maybe a brush with death that led us to wake up to life. Maybe a redundancy at work that helped us follow our side hustle, which was really our passion. Maybe the end of a relationship that set us free and allowed us to become who we could truly be. Most people have at least one moment in their life where they can apply this idea of no mud, no lotus. Without the mud of suffering, we wouldn't have had the lotus flower of spiritual growth. So we ask people to look at that in their life. And then there's an eye-gazing exercise where you find a partner and you sit opposite them and you ask them to close their eyes while you observe them. And there's a guided meditation that you follow. And you acknowledge that they, like you, have experienced suffering. And they, like you, have experienced the blossoming of the lotus flower, these periods of what scientifically we can call post-traumatic growth. People have often heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress. There's also something called post-traumatic growth. It kind of sounds new agey when I first heard it. It's not. This is legit science. There's 15 years of studies of this in the British Psychological Association. Post-traumatic growth is the growth that can happen after a period of acute trauma. And not all the time, but around in 50% of cases, people who've experienced a time of deep trauma have also reported times of psychological growth after that period of acute trauma. So this is post-traumatic growth. And this eye-gazing exercise allows us to really see that in another person and to connect deeply. The idea of no mud, no lotus, though, runs through the whole book. Shadow work can basically be summed up as this: no mud, no lotus. That the shadow isn't something we want to get rid of. Just like these periods of suffering we've had, we don't necessarily want to get rid of them. I'm not saying we enjoyed them. We don't want them to happen again, but we don't want to get rid of them because they led to these periods of growth, these periods of insight. And then the final part of the book, we look at sex, death, and ancestors. What made us or end us, and those who came before us. And those are really the transformation stages of the book. Those are the practices where I can honestly say, if you do those practices, your life will change. And that's not because they're such amazing practices I've created. It's because your life cannot not change if you do them. If you truly embrace and release your sexual story, your life will change. If you truly face and move beyond the fear of our own mortality, your life will change. And if you truly look at where you have come from, the line of your ancestors and the shadow material that you've inherited epigenetically, your life will change. So I can truly say those practices are life-changing.
How do we inherit shadow epigenetically then?
Great question. So the epigenetic inheritance of shadow material is a very interesting subject, and there's a lot of science to back this up. So there was a famous study done called the cherry blossom study, where they took mice and they gave mice electric shocks at the same time as they exposed them to the scent of cherry blossom. Could have been anything, but it's the scent of cherry blossom. They gave them electric shocks and expose them to the scent of cherry blossom. Then eventually, when you expose them to the scent of cherry blossom, they would freak out, even if you didn't give them electric shocks, right? Because you had traumatized them. The traumatized mice had learned to associate the smell of cherry blossom with the trauma of being electrocuted. so far so horrible, right? I wish they didn't do these experiments, but they did. These traumatized mice then gave birth. So they mated and gave birth to another generation of mice. These mice, as soon as they were born, the baby mice, they were removed from their parents. So there couldn't be any kind of transmission of the trauma. Again, another thing to be done. Yeah. Then when you expose these mice to the scent of cherry blossom, they freak out. Even though there was nothing in their week-old life that had led them to fear cherry blossom. Something had been passed down the line from their parents to the children to make them fear the scent of cherry blossom. Then these children, mice, mated, had children. So now it's the grandchildren of the originally traumatized mice. They are exposed to cherry blossom and they freak out. Yeah. Even though there is no reason that they would have any fear of cherry blossom, something has been passed down the line 2 generations to make them fear the scent of cherry blossom. Then once you get to the 4th and 5th generations, the mice no longer freaked out, but they had a startle response when you presented them with the smell of cherry blossom. This is nuts. This was published in Nature. This is not fringe science. Think of what that means for the state of the world today. Yeah. You know, without being too specific. If we are traumatized by the experiences of our grandparents, think of what happens in the world today. I'm not saying it excuses anything that happened, but it might explain some of what's happening in the world today when you look at epigenetic trauma. And this has been replicated. This has been in major scientific journals, and yet it is not part of policy. Why? Because it would be too huge to put this into policy. Think of what it might mean for reparations for formerly enslaved people. Think of what it might mean for the state of the Middle East. People who've been traumatized by the experience of their grandparents in the Second World War and the Holocaust. But it's such an interesting subject, and it's so important to make people aware of this. An interesting study they did that most people don't know about after the cherry blossom was they wanted to see if it was reversible. And they did a really interesting study. They took the grandchildren of the originally traumatized mice, and they gave them a form of exposure therapy, where they gave them a little bit of the scent of cherry blossom while they stroked them. And they gave them food and allowed them to do fun things like run on the wheel. A form of basic exposure therapy, a form of shadow work. Yeah. And eventually they came to not fear a scent of cherry blossom. Then they thought, I wonder if that can be passed down. So when those mice who had integrated their previous fear of cherry blossom then gave birth to the next generation, when they were exposed to cherry blossom, no trigger response. Wow. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So the question you asked before about how can we help with the shadow of our children, the greatest gift we can do is to integrate our own shadow, if we can, before we actually give birth.
So these can be societal. They can also be personal to your own family, I suppose. They can be very specific as well, can't they?
You see these shadow traits passed down in family lines very directly. And that's why one of the exercises in the last part of the book is working with the ancestral shadow, where I ask people to make a pilgrimage back to the place of their ancestors' birth. So find either a maternal line or paternal line. You do them separately, and you travel back. And you see if you can go to the graveyards where your ancestors are buried. You see if you can find their records in the town halls where they lived. You see if you can find the places, the properties they used to own or places they used to live. And as you make a pilgrimage in real life back to the places of your ancestors, there's a series of questions you can do to help you gain some insight into the shadow material of your ancestors. And you see if you can find any recurring themes. So like when I did it with my maternal side, I found on the dark shadow, I found recurring themes of infidelity, of lying, and of denial. Came up again, strange things, right? A lot of infidelity, a lot of lying, a lot of denial of who people were. I thought, wow, that's in me. And with that, I now have, knowledge is power. I'm now empowered with the knowledge that I might have these traits within me. So I need to be on the lookout for these being triggered. And then the golden side of my ancestral line, it was performance. I had all these people, they were performers. Like there was a vaudeville group that my great-great-great-grandparents were part of. Even on my dad's side, I found that my great-great-great-grandfather was a knife thrower who performed for the Tsar of Russia. He was like this kind of, you put the apple on the head, you throw the knife, these kind of stuff. And I saw, so on both sides of my family line, I've got this golden aspects of being a performer. And I thought, well, of course I ended up on stage doing the kind of work that I do. It had to be, that line was there. So we trace our ancestry back and we start to see the recurring shadow patterns that appear there. And then also there's an exercise where you write a letter to your ancestors and then you burn it as a way of posting it. And that kind of ceremonial letter writing to those who came before you is a really powerful way of integrating that ancestral line. And you tell your ancestors, this is what I'm ready to take forward. This is what I'm ready to give back. And I leave this here. And it can be a really powerful way of preventing that epigenetic trauma being passed down, I think.
Let's go back to dreams for a minute, Charlie. So you emphasize dreams as being a gateway to the unconscious.
Yeah.
And so how can we start interpreting our dreams through the lens of shadow work?
Okay. In the same way as, if you start doing a new hobby like paddle, everyone getting into this paddle at the moment, right? Let's say you get really into paddle and it becomes a new kind of central preoccupation of your life, something, this new hobby you're really into. You are likely to start dreaming about paddle because you're thinking about it all day. It's a new thing, you're really into it. So the brain uses the REM dreaming sleep state to process that new data and to work through it unconsciously. So in the same way, when you start doing shadow work exercise in the daytime, the shadow will naturally start to express itself in your dream. You will start dreaming about shadow work. So it will happen very naturally. You don't need to kind of go looking for it. However, what the exercises that we do in the waking state give us is kind of like an inventory of the content of our shadow. When you've answered the questions, the shadow work questions, when you've done the bag we drag behind us, when you've done the mask exercise, you start to have this like inventory of the content of your shadow. So then what you do in the morning after a dream, and what exercise that teach you how to remember your dreams, start to diarize them, this kind of stuff. You wake up, you write down your dreams, and then you start looking through the dream through the lens of the shadow. You ask yourself, where in this dream might there be personifications of my dark shadow, or personifications of my golden shadow, or elements of my golden or dark shadow? So let's say you read through this dream, and what you might have fobbed off with this random dream about that kid from school who was the bully, you now suddenly realize, oh, wow, I had a dream about this kid from school who was the bully. I haven't thought that person for 30 years. Might they be a representation of part of my shadow side, the part of me that feels bullied or feels wounded? And then later on in the dream, maybe you're having tea with the Dalai Lama. And rather than just, oh, what a weird dream, you go, oh, wait, Dalai Lama, what's in my golden shadow? Oh, my suppressed spirituality. So maybe this dream about befriending, making friends with this symbol of spirituality, Dalai Lama, might be indicative of the golden shadow work I've been doing in the daytime. So you start to get this kind of evidential review of the shadow being integrated. And that is super cool because there aren't so many spiritual practices or psychospiritual practices where you get like hard evidence of results. Lucid dreaming is one of them because you get like, I've had a lucid dream, I haven't. And shadow work is another because you start to see the shadow appear in your dreams, showing that it's being revealed, it's being processed in the nighttime. And also in shadow work, you start to see, where am I less triggered in my life? So you can see this thing working. But dream work is a big part of it. I mean, it is totally possible to go on a journey of shadow integration and not look at your dreams, but you'll be missing some really low-hanging fruit if you did that, because the dreams reveal the preoccupations of our internal world. So if you start to see your shadow coming up in your dreams, this is a really good sign. It shows that the processing is happening not just in the daytime, but in the nighttime as well.
And Charlie, you talk about the dreams that are shouting at us in your book. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so this is one of the ways I describe nightmares. A nightmare is a dream that's shouting. It's shouting to draw your attention to some part of the psyche. So when we have a nightmare, it's not that there's anything wrong with us. It's that the dream is shouting, hey, look over here, unintegrated shadow material. Hey, look over here, a wounded part of ourselves. Or hey, look over here, daddy issues from childhood. It's trying to draw our attention to these wounded or unintegrated parts of our mind. So in that way, the nightmare is trying to draw our attention to these wounded or unintegrated parts of our mind. So we can be thankful for our nightmares. Thank you for shouting to indicate where our unintegrated shadow material is.
You say that the sexual shadow can contain some of the most dense shadow material. Why is that, and how can we heal it?
Yeah, so one of the big exercises in the second half of the book is the sexual shadow mask exercise. So this is different to this one. It's another exercise using masks. This one probably gets the most reaction when I discuss it and when I present it at workshops, because when you first hear it, it does sound kind of nuts. It's an exercise, it's a 1,000-year-old exercise from the Toltec Mexica tradition, which is a shamanic tradition from the Mexica people who who are in the place now called Mexico. And they realized that a big part of the densest shadow material we have is around sexual shame and sexual repression. So they developed this exercise, the shamans are over 1,000 years ago in Mexico, that allowed us to download the story of our sexual history as a way of releasing any shame that we have attached to it, and also like clearing the slate of our sexuality. So I'll describe it, and it does sound weird when you first hear it. In this exercise, you are going to spend 36 minutes a day. That's explain why it is 36 minutes a day, 21 days straight, looking into a mirror, wearing a mask that fully covers your face. Any mask will do, but it's got to fully cover your face, speaking out loud for 36 minutes a day about your relationship to sex and sexuality.
Gosh.
Why do we do this? It's to do with the mask. If I ask you to think about your mum, alive or dead, think about your mum. I'll think about mine. Okay. I bet you didn't think about her elbow or her foot. I bet you thought of her face, because we tend to associate face with identity. So to do this exercise, you cover up your face with a mask. It doesn't even, a mask could be a hijab, anything that covers your face fully. And then you look into the mirror and you speak your sexual history out loud into the mirror. So by doing this, you're creating a disidentification between the story that you're hearing being told by the mirror and the face that is saying it. In their shamanic teachings, if you were to do this practice without the mask, if you were to just stand in front of a mirror, speaking your sexual history out loud, you would be further concretizing your attachment to that sexual story, because you would see your face speaking that story. However, if you cover the face in a mask, and it could be anything, I used like farmyard animals the first time I did it, it should be a ridiculous mask to really have a sense of humor around it, then apparently your psyche creates a disidentification between the story being told and the person who's telling it. And the first time I came across this, I was like, not only a skeptical Buddhist, but a skeptical British Buddhist. So when I heard my friend, the Mexican shamanic teacher, Sergio Magana, talk about this, I was like, come on, man, that sounds like bullshit. Like, I don't want to try this. But we went on tour together, and a lot of people at the end of workshops were coming up to him and saying, oh, I did the mask exercise, oh, it's life-changing. And I was like, after the fourth or fifth person, I probably need to do this. So I did this exercise, and the first time I'm doing it, I'm in the Buddhist center, in the bathroom with a locked door, standing in front of the mirror, wearing this farmyard animal mask. It was actually what I bought for my godchildren, because I couldn't even bother to buy the mask. So I thought, I'll use the one I've got for them for his birthday. I hope he won't mind. So I'm wearing this like cow mask, right? And standing in front of the mirror. And I start speaking. And for the first 5 minutes, you just feel ridiculous. I'm talking about like, oh, this happened. I remember the first time I kissed a girl. It was spin the bottle. I was 10 years old, blah, blah, blah. And then I started speaking. And at a certain point, you're looking in the mirror and the mask starts to like morph a little bit. I mean, it's probably just your eyes doing funny things, but the mask starts to morph a little bit. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, it's strange, but you're hearing this, you're looking into the mirror so intently, it kind of doesn't look like you anymore. It looks like this mask, and you're hearing it almost for the first time. It sounds like somebody else's story. Very, very strange phenomena. All I can say is if you're hearing it and you're listening to this and you think that sounds crazy and bullshit, just try it. Because I've taught it to hundreds of people now over the last 10 years. And I've had hundreds of people who've had deep, deep integrations of their sexual trauma and their sexual history and their sexual story by doing this practice. So you speak it out loud, and you do it for several days in a row, up to 21 days. And by doing this, it's like you are downloading the story. It's a bit like cookies on your laptop. Like every website you visit puts a cookie in your laptop. And after like months of going to different websites, eventually your laptop gets really slow. And I use a thing called cookie cleaner, that cleans out all the cookies, and suddenly my laptop works quicker again. This exercise is like cookie cleaner, for all of your sexual experiences.
Wow.
It's like everyone you've ever been touched by or touched sexually or emotionally has left a cookie. They left a tracker in your psyche. And this process of speaking them out loud, speaking the experience you had with them out loud, downloading it into the mirror, seems to remove these cookies, remove these trackers. And for some people, they find when they do this exercise, I found this too, a big drop in my perceived libido. And I realized it wasn't necessarily a drop in my libido. It was that after doing this exercise, I had so released my sexual shame that I was now only interested in sex when I was interested in connection.
Wow.
Whereas before, I was interested in sex when I was lonely
Yeah.
or when I was feeling unloved.
Yeah.
The same reason I used to look at porn when I was feeling lonely or feeling unloved. When I did this exercise, my perceived libido dropped, but I realized it wasn't my libido dropped.
Yeah.
It was that my true sexuality was still present. That fake sexuality that was using sex to make myself feel better went. Other people who've done this exercise have found the opposite. They've had this huge rise in libidinal activity because they were suffering more with suppressed sexuality rather than mine, which is more kind of indulged and projected sexuality. It's a very, very powerful exercise. I know it sounds nuts, but all the steps are in the book. It's a very good exercise to try.
Why 36 minutes? And what if there isn't 36 minutes of material?
Thank you. Okay, so 36 minutes is, it could be roughly half an hour, but basically the Toltecs were really into mathematics. They would use like the measure of the stars in the sky, do certain breathing rhythms and stuff like that. And 36 was the number of death and dream. So 36 is a big number, but it can be around 30 or 40 minutes.
Okay.
And if during your 36-minute session you run out of things to say, think about this. Think, if I was with a sexologist now or a sex therapist, what would I say? Just keep speaking.
Okay.
And you can do your relationship to sexuality, your first sexual experiences, the relationship to porn, the relationship to what they told you about sex at school. You can do a kind of a half an hour session on each of these things. And then you'll find actually you make up the 21 days very, very easily. Some people want to go more. There's actually a lot to say once you get down to it. And one of the people in Mexico I first met, she did this. She was actually a virgin. And she still managed to do the full 21 days.
Wow.
Because she said she was brought up Catholic. She went to a Catholic school. Even though she had never had sex, she had loads of stuff to download, loads of repression, loads of unhealthy views around what sex is or could be for her.
Yeah.
So it's not really about kind of how much sexual activity you've had. It's about your relationship to sex and sexuality.
Wow, that's fascinating. For many people, the ultimate shadow, even more than that, is death. Why?
So the last exercise in the book is looking at this mortality awareness. From a Buddhist point of view, it said that fear of death is the ultimate fear, is the ultimate shadow, and that transformation of fear of death can integrate all fears in one. Because so much of other things we fear in life are actually based on fear of death. The fear of the death of a relationship, the fear of the death of who we think we are, the fear of the death of being young when we start to age. So much of it is actually fear of death. It may not be so explicit, but it is. And this manifests in what Ernest Becker, a Western theorist, called death anxiety. And he did some really interesting research. Death anxiety he described as unintegrated fear of our own mortality. So people who are basically scared of dying. What they found was people with high levels of death anxiety, kind of people who said, "Oh, never talk about death, you might jinx me," or kind of, "Oh, don't say that, you might die too quick." People who really are uncomfortable at saying the word death, dead, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
They had higher levels of tribalism, nationalism, homophobia, sexism. All of the isms were amplified in people who had a lot of death anxiety. He believed this was because when we are faced with fear of our own death, we tend to huddle towards people who look like us and sound like us, leading to more kind of like a tribalistic view of the world. When you took these people who had a lot of fear around death and you gave them exercises like we have in the book, things like 7 days left to live, things like writing your own eulogy, things like looking at why you're afraid of death and death of others, this kind of stuff. These kind of workshop exercises to help integrate fear of death, their levels of homophobia, sexism, racism, tribalism dropped. So it seems like integrating a fear of death is actually good for you. Good for you, makes us kinder human beings. Yeah. They then did another study at this American university where they found that working with fear of death actually made you better at stuff. So they had these basketball players and they wanted to stand on the free throw line. It's kind of like taking penalty, right? A soccer penalty. And they're shooting baskets like that. And they then present these people with unconscious but subtle reminders of the fact they're going to die. So one case, it was the researchers wore skull t-shirts, very subtle. In other cases, the researcher walked underneath the basketball basket holding a sign saying, "You are going to die soon." Something like that. And basically, they watched how many baskets they shot. They found a direct correlation between awareness of their own mortality and how many baskets they scored. Basically, when it gave them these unconscious reminders of the fact they're going to die, they got better at basketball because there was something in them that was saying, this could be the last shot that I throw, so I better land it.
Yeah.
So again, they found that actually being more aware of our own mortality makes us better at stuff. So we have this idea that if we think about death and we talk about death, we're going to get really, really down in the dumps. The people who think and talk about death the most are the Tibetan Buddhists. Look at the Dalai Lama and these other Buddhists. They don't seem that down in the dumps.
Yeah.
And yet Dalai Lama meditates on death 6 times a day. I think since his 80th birthday, his main meditation now is death. And he said, well, that's the next big adventure for me, so I need to focus on that in particular. So one of the exercises we do in the book is called 7 Days Left to Live, a really beautiful exercise where I ask you to imagine that you had 7 days left to live, not of ill health, 7 days of perfect health, but in a week from now, you're going to die. And then I ask you, if you had a week left, what would you do, say, or make happen so that you could die at peace with the world? And I ask you to be very specific and realistic. And then I actually ask you, if there's one thing on your list of 3 or more things that you said you would do if you had 7 days left to live, if there's one of those things you can realistically do in the next week from now, will you commit to doing it? And then I ask people to do it. And if it's an email saying, I'm sorry, or a text saying, I love you, or, an apology to be made, or a hug to give, or a place to visit, if you can realistically make that happen in the next week, why not give it a shot? Why not try it? So we ask people to really bring that shadow integration off the page and into their daily life. And that can lead to some really powerful integrations. So we finish on that in the book, like looking at death and learning to embrace it, because it's the shared commonality of human experience. The only thing I can say about you for sure is you're going to die successfully. You might have failed at everything in life, but there you are going to die. Definitely. You'll definitely die. And yet we're so scared to speak about it. We have this idea that death is somehow a swear word. Even the way we discuss it with others. Now, I think sometimes using terms like passed away, passed on can be really helpful. If it's really raw for someone, they just lost someone, then those can be good euphemisms to use. And also, every time we use a euphemism for death, every time we say passed away, gone to the other side with the angels rather than dead, they have died, we're creating a subtle unconscious perception that death is a swear word.
Right.
That there's something bad about saying the word dead or death. And that will feed into our death anxiety. So can we be brave enough to drop those euphemisms and to talk about death more openly? Have we written our will, however young we are? Are things in order? Could we live the next week as if we have a week left to live? Everyone says, oh, live every day like it's your last. If you did that, no one would turn up for work.
No.
Everyone would be bucket listing, doing crazy stuff, having sex, we'd be doing drugs, it'd be crazy, right? But maybe you could live every week or even more accessible every year. That's really doable. We could think, if I had a year left to live, what would I keep doing and what would I stop doing? And a big part of our shadow work is to stop doing those things and to keep doing those things. To live every year like we've got 1 year left. That's doable. That's practical. And that's a way to really fully embrace the shadow in our life.
Yeah. Charlie, we've spoken a lot about shadow work, but we haven't actually explored yet why we would want to do this and what the benefits are.
Yeah. So what are the benefits of shadow work? Because it sounds like a lot of work. It sounds kind of scary.
Hard.
It gets hard. You're answering questions like, what am I most afraid of? What am I most ashamed of? Screw that. I don't want to do that. I want to sit and sunbathe for a little bit. Great. If you are totally happy in your life, if people do not trigger you, if you are completely well balanced in your life, to be honest, you probably don't need to do the shadow work. But if, like me, there are lots of triggers in your life, you feel totally out of balance sometimes, you're working with trauma and shame from your childhood and all this kind of stuff, then there's a lot of work to be done. And shadow work is very, very good for that. What are the benefits of shadow work? I would say one of the first benefits is actually energy. Increased energy. So people who are feeling lethargic, people who are feeling stuck in their life, people who are feeling like they're kind of on the treadmill, shadow work is a really good way to break those cycles, because a lot of our, like, we should be in a constant state of chi, of energy. Our chi, our internal energy should be flowing constantly. But the thing that blocks it are our fears, our traumas, our shame, our inadequacy, our lack of self-worth. This creates blocks in our energy system. Anything we can do to remove those blocks, to integrate them, it's not that it will give us more energy, but it will release the energy that has been blocked by the shadow. So a big thing for people when they start doing shadow work is this sense of more energy. And I think we felt this to a small degree. You know, if you're carrying like a really big secret, a really shameful secret, then you finally share it with a friend. And after you share it, and as long as they don't reject you for it, oh, that's okay, you know, I really understand that. Don't we feel this sense of uplift, this sense, oh, woof, God, I feel so much, we say, I feel so much lighter. I feel like a weight has come off my shoulders.
A problem shared is a problem halved.
Exactly.
Literally.
Yeah, I would say that perceived weight leaving our shoulders is a sense of this chi, this energy flowing that happens when we start to integrate these blocks to our shadow. It's almost like, I sometimes describe the shadow as, like, imagine you're carrying a massive pumpkin. You know, there's like comedy-sized pumpkin. People grow for the competitions. Imagine this pumpkin is your shadow, right? And I'm carrying this through life. And I don't want you to see it. So I've got a big trench coat around my pumpkin like that. Now, you have also got a pumpkin, right? That you're unwilling to discuss yours too. So you've got your big pumpkin. And we're kind of bumbling through life, like knocking into each other. We can't fully connect because our pumpkins are in the way, right? We can kind of maybe one hand, we can shape, but we can't fully connect. That pumpkin is your shadow. It's heavy, it's weighing you down, but also it's nutritious. Now, what would happen if rather than carrying around these shadows, we not only revealed them to each other, but we dropped them? Suddenly now that space between us has become shortened. We can now connect fully with both our hands. But we've got these pumpkins beneath us. Rather than stepping over them, we can make pumpkin pie. We can, as Jung said, eat the shadow, meaning gain nourishment, gain energy from the shadow. And this is what happens. This is why we have more energy when we do shadow work, because these parts of ourselves that we're ashamed of, that we're afraid of, that we hide from others, once we bring them into the light, we can transmute their energy. In every dark shadow element, there is some gold within it. And we can transmute that gold when we start to become aware of our shadow. So the first thing I say is more energy.
Yeah.
The second big benefit to shadow work, I'd say, is authenticity. Once you start to do the shadow work, you become a hell of a lot more authentic, because you start to know yourself. You know thyself was written above the cave and the Oracle of Delphi. Know thyself. This is one of the main aspects of all spiritual practice. Doing the shadow work, you get to know yourself. Like, oh, this is me. This is what I hide from others. You look in the bag. Oh, this is the baggage that I'm working with now. You speak your sexual shame into the mirror. You start to learn, oh, these are my sexual traumas. This is what I'm working with. Once you know yourself, you become a lot more authentic. And when you show up more authentically, you give others opportunity to show up authentically too. It's like, people say, oh, we're all in the same boat. We're not. I mean, the patriarchy means that definitely 50% of us are not in the same boat. We are not in the same boat, but we're in the same storm.
Yeah.
The storm of the unenlightened human condition. And once you start to work with your shadow, I realize when I look at you, we're not in the same boat, but we're in the same storm. There will be stuff in my mask that undoubtedly you have in yours. I'm sure of it. And if we were to share our mask, we'd find that out.
Yeah.
So it breeds a sense of authenticity that allows us to connect deeper with others. And also it makes us kinder. It really makes us kinder. Once you start to look at your shadow and you go, fuck, look at what I'm working with. These traumas from childhood, this sexual shame, this fear of my own mortality, this lack of expressing my inner gold.
Yeah.
But I'm still here. But I'm okay. There's a sense of kindness to yourself that after all this shadow that you've got within you, you made it. And you start to look at other people the same way. You're more authentic and you're kinder to others. And another one of the benefits of shadow work, I would say, is spiritual growth. So this may not be for everyone. People are just into the psychological stuff and they can leave it there. But for those who are on the spiritual path, shadow work is essential. Like, love and light can get you so far. And the thing is, it's quite insidious because it can get you quite far. So there is, it can be quite seductive that if you just do the love and light stuff, you can actually get quite far on the spiritual path, but there will come a point where you'll stop. Like, if you want to get to the mountaintop, you have to go into the shadow. If you're happy just pottering along the flats, then actually you probably don't need to go that deep into your shadow. Just the love and light stuff, a little bit of mindfulness will be enough. But if you really want to reach the mountaintop, if you really want to do the work, if you really want to make spiritual progress, you have to go into the shadow. You know, how could we think that we can't? Jesus had to do the 40 days, 40 nights, you know, meeting the devil. Muhammad had to do facing Satan. Buddha had to face Mara, the Lord of Illusion. All of these great enlightened beings at one point had to turn to face their shadow. And it's so important for us to do it as well. Like, the shadow is the greatest source of energy in the psychophysical system. So the energy that we need to make it to the mountaintop is found in the shadow. So the path of love and light will take you so far. But at a certain point, you have to turn to the shadow if you want to go beyond, if you really want to make spiritual progress. So this is why you find shadow work in every spiritual tradition, not in every religious tradition. Wow, religious traditions are in many ways the antithesis to shadow work, but spiritual traditions, the real esoteric side found within the exoteric religion, will be shadow work 100%. So for anyone on the spiritual path, shadow work is vital.
And what would you say to anyone who is too scared?
Yeah, shadow work is scary, right? You looked at it, you're like, no way, I want to do this stuff. It's scary. I would say the greatest gift you can give to yourself and others is an integrated shadow. You know, the scariest people in the world are those who either have not integrated their shadow or who, even worse, say they don't have one. Those are really dangerous people because they have no idea what they're working with. They have no idea how deep the trauma runs within them. But people who turn to face their shadow become safe people. They become authentic people. They become kind people. They don't become perfect people. They reveal themselves as beautifully imperfect. And in that imperfection, we find safety because we realize, this is their human face. You know, this is who they really are. So it can seem scary doing the shadow work, but it is totally safe. It is the greatest gift you can give yourself and others. And it really can change the world. Because if everybody was integrating their shadow, if everybody was transmuting their shame, being less afraid, being more willing to step into their gold, the world would change. So I think we can change the world through shadow work. And if we can be willing enough just to step into those places that scare us, we'll find a deep, deep gold within.
Charlie, that feels like a beautiful, natural place to end the interview. Thank you so much for being here today and telling us all about your book. It's been amazing.
Thank
I hope
you.
you've enjoyed it too.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Good.